Hey, so with Mother's Day coming up in the US, I've noticed that there is a bit of debate around whether women should be better informed, better educated about the impact that becoming a mother has on us, which I agree with to an extent, but I think that it places the onus onto women rather than placing the onus on government and wider society to recognise the contributions that mothers make, but also that there needs to be, in basic terms, there needs to be financial recognition of the contribution that mothers make because it is completely unsubsidized. It is free domestic labour, which is vital to any economy or any community or culture to be able to survive, let alone thrive. I mean, it's the basics of how we are a functioning society. And I talked before about the big walkout in Iceland in 1975, where women recognised that and they used that as a kind of a political statement to hit the economy where it hurts by withdrawing that unpaid labour for a period of 24 hours. And it's no coincidence that they are a country which has strong female representation in government now, and they have made huge inroads around equality and in terms of recognizing the impact and contribution that women can make. But they're still not there. There's still issues around domestic abuse and violence against women, and they're not that different to any other EU country. So the point is that this is where politics meets feminism in its kind of crudest form, because women as mothers are expected to make contributions in terms of it hits our financial health, our physical health, our mental health. It makes us far more isolated. We become disenfranchised from the environment around us. We don't have the same resources. In terms of becoming a mother makes us much poorer, becoming a father makes men wealthier. That's just how it is. Um, so to break it down, the impacts around financial are extensive, and it comes down to the stark difference that women experience before and after having children. There's a brilliant organisation in the UK called Pregnant Then Screwed, which really focuses on this issue of how women are in such a vulnerable, precarious position once we have children. And for me, it was the case that I I'm Generation X, right? And I am kind of from a generation that believed that this had all been sorted out. I thought that I was going to walk into a work environment that recognized my value and my contribution and would protect me. And it wasn't true. That's the reality of it. When I tell people about it, their response is often, "Well, surely that's not legal." The reality is that, for me, what I wanted was the opportunity to work flexibly and for slightly few hours a week. Now, that was 15 years ago, and that was rejected by my employer. They would not agree to that. So my response was to resign. So for me, that's maternal discrimination, and that left me with no choice but to try and find another job. I didn't know how difficult it would be for me to find another job, but I've said it a million times. If I had to make the same choice again, I would choose my children over a job that wasn't going to be even remotely flexible towards my needs. As somebody who had really kind of made an impact, proven myself in a lot of ways. So I wasn't ready for that. And it's the same experience for women in terms of any sort of discrimination. You don't know what you're up against until you hit a wall. And that's the reality of it. And quite often you don't know. What's even worse is you don't know until you look back over your shoulder and think, hang on a minute, I've been doing this for a while. Why are all these men earning more than me? And why am I working longer hours? And why do I take such responsibility for it? Um, it's something that we need to be more open about and talk about, because there's also quite a lot of stigma around it as well. There's this idea that, you know, we have more choice than we do in reality. And it's really hard to kind of be honest about it and talk about it, because there is a sense of you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If I had said, okay, I'll just carry on working full time and I'll just put my baby, who was only about 10 months old, in full time childcare, I couldn't do that. But people assumed that I had the financial resources and means to be able to do it. I didn't. I just had to work it out. And that's quite often how we're left. But there is something in going into it with your eyes wide open. And that's a big part of what I'm advocating for in terms of women empowerment, female empowerment in general. It's this awareness and understanding that things are harder for us purely because we are women, and recognizing that. And there is power in talking about it, in sharing our experiences, but also in pushing back, because we need to be there for other women. We need to be a supportive network to other women. When I lost my job to maternal discrimination, there were people who were just clearly not supportive of that, people who didn't understand. I'd say the majority of people were, but there was a lot of judgment on me in terms of the decision that I had made, as if it was like the easy way out. And actually, that decision, whilst it was the right one, it led to financial disenfranchisement for me over a period of years. And it wasn't just about the financial disenfranchisement, it was also about the social isolation. I went from being somebody who was at the forefront of domestic abuse policy in the UK 15 years ago. I was meeting with Theresa May and David Cameron. I was going to the Home Office in Downing Street. I was being interviewed, and I felt like I was having some kind of impact. The other thing that I was involved in was the Stalking Act in 2012 coming into play, essentially. And also I worked on things like coercive control coming into law. I was doing stuff, I was part of things. People cared what I had to say. And suddenly nobody cared. And nobody cared for a long time. And I had to basically work shifts. I had to kind of go back to the bread and butter of my sector. So I was working in a refuge, I was working in a mental health drop in, I was working minimum wage to really find a way to bring in some income, because it's so disempowering not to be able to do that, but also to find some value, meaning, purpose in what I was doing. And I found it powerful to get back to working frontline with clients. And that did enrich my whole experience of working in the sector. It contributed to my ability as being a trainer and consultant. It made the difference in terms of how I would develop services and respond to the specific needs of our clients. But it was hard. It wasn't fair. I think there needs to be some recognition around how I have a degree and a master's degree from the University of London, and my salary has never reflected the level of expertise that I have or the experience that I've got. So, being a mother has definitely impacted on that. So, it's impacted on my financial health, and it's not just me, it impacts on everyone's financial health. If you become a mother, you are going to be less well off than you were before, and you'll certainly be less well off than your partner if you're heterosexual. You're also going to experience a hit to your physical and mental health. So, for me, I've experienced chronic pain ongoing, particularly since my second son was born. Um, I've also had chronic pain associated with the physicality of domestic labour, like looking after two children predominantly on my own. I mean, I have a very supportive husband, and I think that is important. I mean, that's kind of the foundation, is that I have somebody who is reasonable and grown up and responsible that I can communicate with. But even then, it's really tough because he will inevitably earn more than I do. So you need to kind of recognize how there's the financial hit, the physical. Yeah, so I've had ongoing chronic health problems as a result of childbirth and also the physicality of being a mum. In terms of mental health, I wouldn't say I experienced postnatal depression, but it was hard. It was really isolating, and I think I had to lean on the people that were in close proximity to me. And I did things like I went to volunteer at my local school. I became a school governor, and then I went on to become the chair of governors, which I think was kind of a life-saving thing for me because it put my skills to use and it made me part of the community again. Having said that, I did go on to burn out last year, and that was really because of the culmination of pressures that I was under. And being a mother is part of that. It's like it's um, inextricable. It's part of who I am. It's part of my DNA. It's my most important identifier. Being a mother for me is the most important thing in my life. So I will always focus on that. But it makes it a conflict, and that's the problem. It shouldn't have to be such a conflict all the time. There should be more of at least an awareness of the pressures that mothers are under, whether we're working mothers, whether we might be self-employed, which is what I've decided to do now, to take charge for myself. We might be working for an employer, or we might just be at home. And I don't say just at home because I know what that's like and how tough it is. Um, but any of those scenarios are difficult. And if you place that level of expectation on women, we're going to burn out, and that's what's happening. So, isolation, disenfranchisement, there is no village raising a child anymore. I think probably my generation was the first generation really to kind of experience that full on, where we had really, like my parents' generation, they were close to their parents, who were my parents were the boomers, and their parents were the silent generation, and they just stayed near their parents. My grandma lived like a mile up the road, and my grandparents on the other side, they just lived like a few miles away. So my parents had that support when I was a child, and I never had it because we moved further away. I didn't stay in my hometown, I moved further away. And that makes a huge difference. And there's a lack of understanding there as well. So, like, we're the first generation to go through it. We can't really rely on our parents in the same way. And our parents don't really get it. Nobody really gets it. It's just a kind of expectation. So, in summary, what we need is financial recognition for the contribution that mothers make everywhere. I mean, especially in countries where the United Kingdom is, whether people see it as a positive thing or not, I personally think it's a positive thing. We have the welfare state, and that came about directly after the Second World War. It was brought in by a Labour government, and it was in response to the high levels of deprivation that people were experiencing all across the country. Um, we needed to rebuild, and so what the government did was it invested in free healthcare and a welfare state where if people were not able to work, the state would take care of them. There has never been any sort of recognition or thought about what it means to society to compensate free labour provided by women in the role of motherhood. It's not ever been looked into or debated or even considered in terms of a sound financial investment. And actually, the level of investment is, when you think about how much spending is going up on arms, there are cuts in the UK on disability benefits, but at the same time, we're being told that the arms are going to increase in terms of the spending that we're going to see. So, defence spending budget is what I'm trying to say. So, less missiles, more childcare. Put that on a t-shirt because that's basically what it's about. So let's just recognise what's going on here. And my least favourite person at the moment after the orange one is Keir Starmer, who I'm going to start calling Neville. But he's the person that should really be considering this as a Labour Prime Minister, but is clearly failing and falling asleep at the wheel. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on what it means to become a mum and how much that will cost you financially, physically, mentally, and socially. Then there's probably many others. If you want to add them, please jot them down in the comments, and I'll see you again soon.